Have you ever noticed how a single doorway can make you forget who you have become? You spend years building your own life. You do the hard work of healing. You grow. You learn to protect your peace. And you finally figure out how to stand tall in your own space. But the moment you cross the threshold of your family home, a strange and invisible gravity pulls you backward. Within hours, or perhaps even minutes, you are no longer the calm, capable adult you have fought so hard to be. You become the anxious child, the desperate peacemaker, the quiet observer, the one who carries the blame. What if the deep exhaustion you feel after being with your family is not simply because of what they are doing to you now? What if the exhaustion comes from the heavy, invisible armor you instantly put back on the moment you walk through their door? If you have ever felt emotionally drained, unseen, or trapped in an old script whenever you return to your roots, this is for you. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you carry this pain forever. One of the deepest lessons of Buddhist wisdom is understanding the illusion of a fixed self. We suffer because we believe we are permanently bound to the identities we were handed in the past. When we return to our families, we do not just step into a physical house. We step back into a complex web of old expectations and attachments. We unconsciously cling to the fragile hope that this time they will finally see us as the person we are today. And when they do not, we react from those exact same old wounds. Buddhism reminds us that our suffering arises when we unconsciously agree to participate in this old illusion. Imagine a river that has spent decades carving a deep, rough channel into the earth. When a heavy storm comes, the water naturally rushes into that exact same deep groove. It flows fast and recklessly. Your family dynamics are like that old, deeply carved riverbed. When you are around them, the emotional energy naturally wants to rush down the same familiar, painful path. The arguments follow the same rhythm. The passive comments hit the same bruises. But what if you could choose not to be the water? What if you could be the quiet riverbank, simply watching the turbulent water rush by without being swept away in the current? Think about your own life. Think about the last time you sat in the same room with them. A familiar comment was made. A subtle criticism was dropped into the conversation. A heavy, anxious silence filled the space. Almost immediately, you felt the desperate urge to fix the mood, to defend your choices, or to shrink down and completely disappear. The old role was handed to you, and without even thinking, you took it. You accepted the subtle pain simply out of habit. You confused endurance with family loyalty. Ask yourself, who are you really trying to protect when you suddenly make yourself small? What are you so afraid will happen if you simply refuse to put on the old armor? Is stepping back into that old character truly keeping the peace, or is it only feeding your own fear? The next time you stand before that familiar door, do not rush inside. Pause, breathe. Feel your feet resting firmly on the ground. Remind yourself silently that you are not who you were when you lived there. Let the heavy feeling of the past rise up, but do not make it your identity. Observe the old script they try to hand you, but know that you do not have to read the lines, because true peace is not found in fighting against the old roles. It is found in realizing that you outgrew them a long time ago. But stepping out of the old riverbed is only the first step, and this is where the next truth begins. 2. The illusion of permanent roles. Here is a quiet truth that families rarely speak out loud. The version of you that they expect to see when you walk through the door no longer exists. When you go back to the place where you started, the people there often treat you not as who you are today, but as who they need you to be. Every family has an invisible script. They need you to be the quiet one, so someone else can be the loud one. They need you to be the one who constantly struggles, so someone else can feel secure in their success. They need you to be the eternal peacemaker, the emotional shock absorber, so they do not have to carry their own heavy feelings. We fall into these traps without realizing it. You sit at the dinner table, listen to a dismissive comment about your life, your career, or your choices, and instantly you regress. You feel the sudden sting of being ignored. You feel the heavy pressure to prove your worth. You twist yourself into knots trying to keep the peace, desperately trying to manage everyone else's unspoken anger. Buddhist wisdom teaches us the profound reality of impermanence. Everything is in a constant state of motion and change. A seed breaks open to become a sprout. A river never stops moving toward the ocean. You are not a static object. You are a living, breathing process. The deep suffering you experience around your family comes from attachment, but it is not just their attachment to an old version of you. It is your own lingering belief that you must still perform that old role in order to be loved, or even just to be tolerated. Imagine a butterfly that has finally struggled out of a dark, narrow cocoon. After a long period of darkness, it has grown wings. It has learned to navigate the vast, bright sky. Now imagine that butterfly trying to forcefully fold its fragile wings and crawl back inside the empty, broken shell, just because the shell is familiar. It is impossible. It is painful. The cocoon is not evil. It served its purpose for a season of life. But it is no longer meant to be lived in. This is exactly what happens when you return to deeply entrenched family dynamics. You try to fold up your newly grown wings. You shrink your voice during arguments. You hide your true boundaries to avoid a sudden conflict. You pretend to be smaller, simpler, or more fragile than you actually are, just to fit into an emotional space that you outgrew years ago. You apologize for things that are not your fault, simply because that is what the script demands. Ask yourself, whose comfort are you prioritizing when you constantly fold your wings? What are you afraid will happen if you simply remain in your full size? Are you truly keeping the family peace? Or are you just keeping yourself trapped in an open cage? Stop, breathe. Let the discomfort of their misunderstanding exist in the room. You do not have to explain your growth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You do not have to argue with their outdated perception of who you are. Let them hold on to the old memory of you. You simply stay anchored in the present moment. Because you cannot force others to see the wings you have grown. You can only choose whether or not you will keep flying. And understanding this separation of who you are from who they want you to be brings us to the hardest realization of all. 3. Separating loyalty from suffering. Here is a truth that is incredibly difficult to face. Much of what we call loyalty is simply a very old habit of accepting pain. We are taught from a young age that family is everything. We learn that to be a good son, a good daughter, or a good sibling, we must be willing to sacrifice our own peace. We begin to blur the lines between love and endurance. When a family member is angry, we think we must absorb their fire. When they criticize our lives, we think we must lower our heads and accept it as a strange form of care. We sit quietly while they disregard our feelings, believing our silence is an act of devotion. We convince ourselves that suffering through their emotional storms is the price we must pay to belong. But what if the hardest thing to unlearn is the belief that love requires you to suffer? Buddhist wisdom teaches a profound lesson about the nature of true compassion. In Buddhist thought, compassion is a deep desire for all beings to be free from suffering. But compassion must always be paired with wisdom. Without wisdom, we offer ourselves up to be harmed. We confuse attachment, the desperate clinging to an idea of how our family should be, with genuine love. Letting go of the obligation to hurt is not a rejection of your family. It is simply the recognition that your suffering does not heal them. Imagine a great tree standing on the edge of a rocky cliff. The tree is deeply rooted in the soil. Those roots are its foundation, its deep connection to where it began. But when a violent storm rolls in, the tree does not try to catch the wind. It does not snap its own branches to make the storm feel better. It does not apologize for standing tall. It simply remains firmly rooted and lets the wild, chaotic wind blow entirely around it. This is what happens when you finally separate your loyalty from their chaos. You stop trying to catch their emotional wind. You realize that you can honor your roots without letting the storm tear you apart. You stop twisting your life to accommodate their unspoken demands, their passive comments, or their constant need for control. You begin to understand that absorbing their unhappiness does not actually make them happy. It only leaves you entirely empty. Ask yourself, are you holding on to these painful interactions because they actually bring peace to the house, or because you are terrified of the guilt you will feel if you finally step away? What would your love for your family look like if it did not require your silent suffering? Pause, breathe. Notice the heavy feeling of obligation you carry in your chest. Let it rise, and then slowly let it go. You can love someone deeply without carrying their heavy burdens for them. You can honor where you came from without drinking poison from the soil, because true loyalty is a choice to care, but it was never a contract to be broken. You can love them from a place of quiet strength rather than a place of fear. But to find that strength, you must learn what to do in the exact moment the old triggers arise. And this is where the true power of the mind reveals itself. 4. The power of the quiet pause. What if the most powerful thing you can do when you feel cornered is absolutely nothing? Here is the truth few people want to face. We are deeply conditioned to react. When you are sitting in your childhood home and someone casually drops a harsh judgment about your life, your chest instantly tightens. Your mind begins to race. The desperate urge to defend yourself rises up like a sudden fire. You want to explain your choices. You want to prove that you are capable, that you are an adult, that you are no longer the fragile child they remember. You hold on to the painful hope that if you just find the exact right words, they will finally understand you. But every time you rush to defend your life, you are unknowingly giving away your peace. You are stepping right back onto the emotional battlefield they designed. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that our true freedom exists in the tiny, quiet space between a trigger and our response. We suffer because we believe every action requires an immediate reaction. We believe that if a defensive emotion arises, we must act on it. But mindfulness shows us a different path. It teaches us the profound art of observing without participating. You do not have to catch every emotional sword that is thrown at you. Letting go does not mean you agree with their harsh words. It simply means you realize their words are not yours to carry. Imagine a deep, quiet mountain lake on a perfectly still morning. The water is clear, resting like a mirror, reflecting the vast sky. Suddenly, someone stands on the edge and angrily throws a heavy, jagged stone into the center. If the lake tries to fight the stone, if the water violently thrashes and resists, the sand from the bottom rises up and everything becomes dark and cloudy. But the lake does not fight. It does nothing at all. It simply allows the stone to break the surface and then lets it sink quietly, all the way to the bottom. A few small ripples drift away, and very soon the water is perfectly still again. The stone belongs to the person who threw it. The stillness belongs to the lake. When your family drops a heavy stone of guilt, passive anger, or unfair criticism into the conversation, you do not have to churn your own waters. You do not have to muddy your mind trying to manage their discomfort or correct their misunderstanding. You can simply let the heavy comment sink. You can let the awkward, heavy silence stretch across the room. Often, their criticism is not about you at all. It is simply a loud reflection of their own internal chaos. When you refuse to react, you refuse to take ownership of their storm. Ask yourself, what are you truly trying to prove when you rush to justify your existence? If you already know who you are and what you have survived, why are you handing them the power to debate it? Is your reaction bringing you closer to peace, or is it just feeding the old, familiar cycle of pain? The next time you feel the sudden heat of anger or the sharp sting of being misunderstood, just stop, pause, breathe. Feel the quiet space in the room. Observe the heavy thought, without following it down the familiar road. Let the feeling rise and fall without making it your identity, because true strength is never loud. Peace is not found in finally winning a lifelong argument. It is found in making the quiet, conscious choice to stop attending the battle entirely, but remaining entirely still when everything around you feels chaotic requires a special kind of internal grounding. And this is where the next truth begins. 5. Becoming the mountain. There is a strange kind of freedom in realizing that you do not have to move every time someone tries to push you. We are deeply conditioned to adjust our own internal state to match the emotional temperature of the room. When you return home, you might notice how quickly you become an emotional chameleon. If a parent is anxious, you immediately feel a tight knot of worry in your own chest. If a sibling is angry, you instinctively shrink down to make space for their heavy rage. You spend the entire visit walking softly, constantly measuring the mood, trying to predict the next argument so you can magically soften the blow. You believe that if you just adapt enough, if you just yield enough, you will eventually find safety. But true peace is never found in constantly abandoning yourself to accommodate someone else. Buddhist wisdom speaks of equanimity, a deep, unshakable mental balance. It is the ability to stand entirely still while the world around you spins. Buddhism reminds us that the behavior of others is very much like the weather. It is entirely unpredictable, sometimes warm, and often violent. But just as you cannot control the rain, you cannot control the emotional storms of the people who raised you. Your only task is to stop letting their weather dictate your internal climate. Imagine a massive, ancient mountain. Throughout the year, the mountain experiences every kind of extreme weather. Dark clouds cover its peak. Violent winds tear at its sides. Heavy, freezing snow buries its surface. But the mountain does not panic. It does not shrink down when the wind blows hard. It does not apologize for taking up space when the storm arrives. It simply allows the weather to happen, knowing that every storm eventually runs out of rain. Through it all, the mountain remains exactly what it is. When you sit in your family's home and an old, painful dynamic begins to play out, you do not have to become the wind. You do not have to be blown around by their sudden bursts of control, their unresolved grief, or their lingering disappointment. You can simply be the mountain. You can let their anxiety wash over you without absorbing a single drop into your heart. You can watch them scramble to hand you that old, heavy script, and you can simply breathe, firmly planted in the quiet truth of who you are today. You let their emotional storm pass right over you, leaving your deep center entirely untouched. Ask yourself, who told you that you were responsible for the weather in someone else's mind? Why do you feel the urgent need to break yourself into smaller pieces, just to make their storm feel less intense? What would happen if you simply let them be upset, without rushing in to save them from themselves? Pause, breathe, plant your feet on the floor, feel the solid earth beneath you. Let the storm rage around you if it must, but do not invite the storm inside. Because true emotional independence is not about building walls to keep your family out. It is about becoming so deeply rooted in yourself that their chaos can no longer move you. But to stand this firmly, you have to let go of the deepest, most painful illusion of all. The secret belief that if you just try hard enough, you can finally save them. And this is where the next truth begins. 6. Releasing the need to fix them. Here is a truth that breaks the heart long before it finally brings peace. You cannot heal people who are not ready to be healed. When we love our families, especially when we see them caught in endless cycles of misery, anger, or silent sorrow, a deep instinct rises within us. We want to save them. We analyze their pain. We carefully choose our words, hoping that this time, if we just explain things clearly enough, a light will finally turn on in their minds. We try to orchestrate perfect family gatherings, smoothing over rough edges, sacrificing our own needs just to keep everyone momentarily happy. We carry their unspoken grief as if it were our own, believing that if we just love them hard enough, we can rescue them from their own shadows. But what if the hardest form of letting go is accepting that you are not the savior of your family? Buddhist wisdom teaches us about the profound reality of personal paths. Every individual is walking their own journey, carrying the weight of their own choices, and learning their own lessons. One of the deepest illusions we hold is the belief that we have the power to control another person's awakening. We suffer immensely when we attach ourselves to the outcome of someone else's growth. True compassion is not about taking away someone's pain. It is about loving them exactly where they are, without demanding that they change to make you feel more comfortable. Imagine standing in a long, quiet hallway before a heavy, wooden door. On the other side of that door is someone you love deeply, sitting in a dark and chaotic room. For years, you have stood in that hallway, desperately rattling the handle. You push, you pull, you knock until your hands are bruised and exhausted. You slide notes under the gap, begging them to come out into the warm light. But nothing happens. And then, one day, you finally realize the heartbreaking truth. There is no keyhole on your side. The door can only be unlocked from the inside. This is what it means to try and fix a family dynamic that does not want to be fixed. You drain your own life force trying to pull them into a state of peace they have not chosen for themselves. You exhaust your spirit trying to force a parent to finally understand you, or a sibling to finally let go of their bitterness. But their healing is their responsibility, not yours. You cannot do the inner work for them, no matter how desperately you wish you could. Ask yourself, are you holding on to the heavy burden of fixing them because you truly believe it will work, or because you are terrified of the grief you will feel if you finally stop trying? What would happen if you accepted that they might never understand you and you decided to be entirely whole anyway? Pause, breathe, notice the heavy urge to step in and manage their emotions. Stop trying to force the door open. You can leave a warm light on in the hallway, but you must walk away from the handle. Do your part, offer your quiet presence, and then completely release the outcome. Because true peace is not found in finally changing the people who hurt you. It is found in realizing that you do not need them to change in order for you to be completely free. But stepping back from the role of the savior requires you to know exactly where your responsibility ends. And this is where the next truth begins. 7. The boundaries of true compassion. What if setting a firm boundary is not an act of anger, but the highest form of spiritual love? Here is the truth few people want to face. We have been taught that boundaries are selfish. When you return home, you might feel a crushing weight of guilt just for needing a single moment of silence. If you decide to step out of the room during a heated, familiar argument, or if you gently refuse to answer a deeply critical question about your life, you are immediately labeled as cold or distant. We are conditioned to believe that to be a good family member, we must keep all our doors wide open, allowing everyone full, unrestricted access to our time, our energy, and our emotional reserves. We equate saying no with a lack of love, but Buddhist wisdom teaches us that true compassion must always be paired with deep wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion easily becomes self-destruction. Loving kindness does not mean you must become a welcome mat for someone else's unresolved pain. In Buddhism, it is understood that if you willingly allow another person to harm your spirit or disrupt your peace, you are silently participating in the continuation of their suffering. Protecting your peace is not a rejection of your family. It is a profound realization that you cannot pour pure water from an empty and exhausted well. Imagine a single, bright candle burning calmly in a quiet room. The small flame provides warmth and gentle light to everything around it. Now, imagine that a heavy, cold wind begins to blow violently through an open window. If you want to keep the light alive, you do not. Simply stand back and let the wind extinguish the flame in the name of absolute acceptance. You place a clear glass shield entirely around the candle. The glass shield does not hate the wind. It does not try to fight or argue with the storm outside. It simply creates a clear, firm boundary so the fire can continue to burn safely. This is exactly what a boundary is in your own life. When your family begins to spiral into old, toxic arguments, or when they direct passive anger toward your choices, you do not have to let their wind blow out your light. You can place a quiet shield around yourself. You can calmly stand up and leave the room. You can choose to end a draining conversation. You can decide to visit for only 2 hours instead of an entire exhausting weekend. You do not have to explain your glass shield to them, and you do not have to apologize for protecting your own flame. Ask yourself, are you constantly letting your light be blown out because you think that is what a loyal family member is supposed to do? What are you truly afraid will happen if you finally put up the glass? Is your lack of boundaries actually healing your family, or is it only quietly destroying you? The next time you feel the cold wind of an old family dynamic rushing toward you, do not wait for your flame to flicker and die. Pause, breathe, recognize that you are allowed to protect your energy. Step back gracefully and firmly, without anger and without needing them to agree with your choices. Because you cannot offer genuine warmth to anyone if your own fire has been completely extinguished. But holding these boundaries brings us to the ultimate challenge of every homecoming, the moment you finally leave. And this is where the final truth begins. 8. Walking out the door as who you are now. Think back to that physical doorway we spoke of at the very beginning, the familiar threshold where, for so many years, you unknowingly left your true self behind. The exact spot where you put on the heavy, invisible armor of your childhood simply because you did not know how else to survive the visit. For so long, you believed that enduring the pain was the only way to belong. You believed that if you just played the old part flawlessly, if you just absorbed their anger, managed their expectations, and kept your own voice quiet, you were holding the family together. But now you can see the quiet, heartbreaking truth. The deep exhaustion you felt every time you finally drove away from that house was never just about what they said or did to you. It was the crushing, devastating weight of repeatedly abandoning yourself. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that true inner peace does not require a peaceful environment. It only requires a firmly planted anchor. The deepest transformation of your life happens the moment you realize that you do not need your family to suddenly understand the depths of your soul for you to be completely free. You do not need them to validate your choices, applaud your boundaries, or even acknowledge your growth for your growth to be real. Non-attachment is not about walking away with a cold, bitter, and closed heart. It is the profound realization that you can leave the door of compassion wide open while refusing to stand frozen in the hallway, waiting for someone else to change. Imagine a strong wooden boat moving gracefully through rough, dark water. The water constantly splashes against the sides. The chaotic waves push and pull, trying to throw the boat off its course. But the boat does not sink. It does not sink because it simply refuses to let the rough water inside. You are that boat. Your family's unresolved pain, their old heavy scripts, and their sudden emotional storms that is just the rough water. You can navigate it. You can even hold deep gratitude for the difficult river from which you came. But you do not ever have to let their heavy water into your boat again. Think about your own life. As you pack your bags and prepare to leave their house the next time, quietly observe the feelings rising in your chest. Notice the lingering urge to apologize for who you are, and then gently release it. Ask yourself, who is actually walking out the door today? Is it the anxious, fragile child who is still desperately begging to be seen? Or is it the quiet, deeply grounded adult who finally realizes they no longer need permission to exist? As you turn the handle and step back out into the open air, do not carry their heavy stones with you. Leave the old script resting on the kitchen table. Leave the unearned guilt at the threshold. You did your best. You loved them with all the wisdom and boundaries you have now. You stayed, beautifully anchored in your own truth. And now, it is time to return to your own calm, peaceful life. If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. You can let go now.